In 2025, the head of Sweden's central bank walked into parliament, and he said something no one expected. He told lawmakers that Sweden's cash system had become dangerously vulnerable. He said the situation was so serious that emergency laws were needed immediately. Not next year, not after a review, immediately. This was not a random economist. This was the governor of the Riksbank, the central bank of the most cashless country on earth, asking for emergency legislation to protect cash. Think about what that means. The same institution that watched cash disappear for years, the same institution that said nothing when ATMs vanished from entire regions, the same institution that called the digital transition progress, was now standing in front of Parliament, saying the system had gone too far, saying cash needed to be protected by law, saying it was urgent. That is where the story ends. But to understand why it matters to you right now, you need to understand how it started. And more importantly, you need to understand why America is following the exact same path. Sweden was supposed to be the model, the country that showed the world how to eliminate cash. Not partially, not temporarily, completely. A real-world experiment on a national scale. A place where money no longer needed to exist in your hands. A place where coins became useless, where paper bills slowly disappeared from daily life, where everything moved into a system you could not see or touch. And for a while, it worked. By 2022, only 8% of Swedes used cash for their most recent purchase. 8%. Let that number sink in. Out of 100 transactions in Sweden, only 8 involved physical money. The other 92 were completely digital. No coins changing hands, no bills being counted, no physical exchange of any kind. Just numbers moving from one screen to another. You did not need a wallet anymore. You did not need to carry change. You did not need to think about what was in your pocket. All you needed was access. A card, a phone, an app. That was it. And at first it felt like freedom. It felt like the next logical step forward for society. Faster payments, no delays at the register, no fumbling for exact change, no waiting for the cashier to count bills. You tap, you confirm, you leave. Clean, efficient, seamless. It removed friction from everyday life. And when something removes friction, people adopt it fast, very fast. Banks saw it happening, and instead of managing it carefully, they accelerated it. They stopped handling cash altogether, not gradually, not with a plan to protect people who needed it, but decisively, as if cash was already obsolete. You could walk into a major bank in Sweden and not be able to withdraw physical money. That sounds like something from a film, but in Sweden, it became completely normal, and ATMs followed the same direction. They started disappearing, first from major city centers, then from smaller towns, then from entire rural regions, places where you could drive for hours and not find a single working ATM, not because the machines broke, because nobody replaced them when they did, because the banks had decided cash was done. And stores followed the same logic. Signs appeared everywhere. Card only, no cash accepted. Digital payments only. If you walked in with physical money, you could not complete your purchase. Not because they did not want your business, because their systems literally could not process cash anymore. And that is the moment something fundamental changed. Not just in Sweden, but in the idea of what money is. Because money used to be something you had, something physical, something in your hand, something that could not be turned off. But now money had become something you accessed, something that existed inside a system, something that required permission to use. And permission can always be revoked. But nobody was thinking about that yet, because everything still worked. Everything felt easier. Everything felt modern. And Sweden became the example the world pointed to. The future of payments, the blueprint for a cashless society, the place financial experts put on conference slides and said, this is where we're all going. But here is what those conference slides never showed. Systems do not reveal their weaknesses when everything is working. They reveal their weaknesses when something breaks. And in Sweden, things started breaking. Not dramatically, not all at once, slowly, quietly, in ways that were easy to dismiss at first. The first cracks appeared in the most vulnerable places, among the elderly. Sweden has a significant elderly population, people in their 70s and 80s who grew up with cash, people who never owned a smartphone, people who did not have banking apps, people who simply wanted to pay for their groceries the way they had for 50 years, with physical money, and they could not. They walked into stores with cash in hand and were turned away. They had money, real money, but the system would not accept it. And this was not a rare edge case. This was happening across the country. Sweden's own central bank later acknowledged it formally. Financial inclusion had become a genuine national crisis. An entire generation of citizens effectively excluded from basic commerce, not because they were poor, not because they had done anything wrong, but because the system had moved on without them. And then it happened to another group, homeless people. For generations, if you wanted to help someone on the street, you reached into your pocket, you gave them something, a coin, A bill, a small act of human connection. That disappeared in Sweden. Nobody carried coins anymore. Nobody carried small bills. If you wanted to help someone without a phone or a bank account, there was no way to do it. The system had no mechanism for that transaction. And so an entire category of human compassion simply ceased to exist in everyday life. Then came the fraud numbers. And this is where the story gets alarming. Because one of the main arguments for going cashless was safety. Digital payments, people were told, were safer than cash. Harder to steal, harder to lose, more traceable, more secure. Sweden had bought that argument completely. And then the data came back. Bank card fraud jumped 44% between 2022 and 2023. 44%. In a single year, digital scams doubled in that same period. Criminals stole the equivalent of 114 million US dollars from Swedish citizens in 2023 alone. Not through robbery, not through pickpocketing. Through the digital system, those citizens had been told was safer than the cash they gave up. A senior economic crime prosecutor in Sweden went public with his assessment. He described his country as a kind of Silicon Valley for criminal fraud, a place where sophisticated digital crime had become a serious growth industry, where criminal networks had adapted faster than law enforcement, where the elimination of cash had created a target-rich environment for theft. And then he said something even more significant. He said that the decision to eliminate cash had been a strategic mistake. A strategic mistake, not a minor policy error. Not something that could be fixed with a software update. A fundamental strategic mistake. The people whose job it was to fight financial crime in Sweden were now publicly stating that the cashless transition had made things worse. Not better. Worse. But the fraud problem was not even the biggest issue. The biggest issue was dependency. Because here is something nobody talked about when Sweden went cashless. A digital payment system only works when the infrastructure supporting it works. The internet has to be up. The power has to be on. The servers have to be running. The network has to be functioning. Every single one of those conditions has to be true for you to be able to buy a loaf of bread. And in the real world, those conditions are not always true. Sweden, as Civil Contingencies Agency, issued a formal government warning about this, an official document stating that in the event of a serious cyber attack or a major power outage, a fully cashless society would not be able to function. Not struggle to function, not function with reduced capacity, simply not function. They pointed to major power outages that had already occurred across southern Europe, cities that went dark, stores that could not process any payments, people who could not buy food or medicine for their families, not because they had no money, because the system connecting their money to their purchases was offline. And in those moments, nobody could help, because there was no alternative, no backup, no cash drawer, no way around the broken system. The Riksbank governor made this point directly to Parliament. He argued that the ability to pay for food, healthcare, and medicine without an internet connection is not a nice feature to have. It is essential. He called for mandatory laws forcing supermarkets, pharmacies, healthcare centers, and gas stations to accept cash as a legal obligation, not optional, mandatory. He told lawmakers directly that the cash infrastructure had become dangerously vulnerable, and that, without urgent action, the country was exposed to risks it was not prepared for, the most cashless country in the world. Asking for emergency protection of the very thing it had spent years eliminating. Now here is where this stops being a story about Sweden and starts being a story about you, because Americans are making the same transition, step by step. The numbers make it impossible to ignore. Zelle processed $1 trillion in transactions in 2024 alone. $1 trillion through a single app in 1 year. Venmo has over 90 million active users in the United States. Apple Pay is accepted at over 90% of US retailers. The Federal Reserve launched its own instant payment system in 2023. It is called FedNow. It runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It is designed to make cash feel unnecessary for any transaction at any time. And it is working. More Americans than ever are going weeks without touching physical cash. More businesses than ever are quietly moving toward card and app-only systems. The direction is identical to Sweden. The pace is slightly slower, but the destination is the same. And here is the proof that the destination matters. In February 2021, a winter storm hit the state of Texas. Storm Uri. 4.5 million homes and businesses lost power, some for hours, some for days. The electric grid came within seconds and minutes of a complete and total collapse. That is not speculation. The CEO of ERCOT, the organization that manages the Texas power grid, said those exact words publicly after it happened. Seconds and minutes from total collapse. And across Texas during those days, stores posted the same sign everywhere. Cash only, not because they preferred cash, because card readers were offline. Point of sale systems were down, payment apps did not work. Bank servers were unreachable. The only payment system that functioned during one of the worst natural disasters in modern American history was cash. The thing Sweden eliminated. The thing American apps are slowly replacing. The thing that fewer and fewer people carry. Storm Uri killed at least 246 people in Texas. It caused an estimated $195 billion in damage. And in the middle of it, in the stores that were still open, in the places where people were desperately trying to get food and supplies, cash was the only thing that worked. Because cash does not need a server. Cash does not need the internet. Cash does not need a power grid. Cash does not need a company's app to be running. Cash works when everything else fails. And that is exactly what Sweden learned. After the fact. After the system was already built. After the alternatives were already gone. After reversing course had become enormously difficult. Their central bank governor is now standing in front of Parliament asking for emergency laws to protect the very thing they spent years eliminating. But reversing course is not simple. Because once people adapt to a system, once infrastructure is rebuilt around it, once businesses stop accepting the alternative, you cannot just go back. Sweden is finding that out right now. And while Sweden scrambles to undo what it built, another country went even further. A country that did not fail. A country where the system worked exactly as designed. Every single transaction tracked. Every payment monitored in real time. Every purchase recorded permanently. No gaps in the data, no alternative payment method, no cash to fall back on. $2.4 trillion already processed through the system. Not in a test, not in a pilot program. In reality, right now, operating across 26 cities, with 260 million digital wallets already active. And this system does not just track payments, it controls them. Money in this system can be programmed to expire. If you do not spend it by a certain date, it disappears. Money can be restricted to certain categories of purchases. There are things you simply cannot buy with certain types of digital money. Money can be limited to certain geographic areas. It works in some places, and it does not work in others. This is not a theory about what digital money could become. This is documentation of what digital money already is, in one country, right now. And that country is China. And the central banks of over 130 other countries are studying what China built and asking how to build their own version. That is next week. And if what happened in Sweden made you uncomfortable, what China built will change the way you think about money completely. If this video showed you something you did not know before, if it made you think differently about the way you pay for things every day, then you need to be here next week, because the series is only getting started. Each video connects directly to the next one, and the further this series goes, the more important it becomes. Subscribe to Capital Awareness right now. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next video. Because what is coming next week is something most people will not see until it is too late. Subscribe now.